All right, so now let's simply go ahead and do our API requests. So to do that, just simply go ahead and navigate to your app.js, right? So remember, in this app.js, we had already defined our function called addUser that was being called from, if you still remember, this addUser was being called from the register user component in our form, right? Remember, we had a form which had an onSubmit method. So this onSubmit, when we hit the submit button, the onSubmit event was triggered. Then it was calling the onSubmit method that we declared here, if you still remember. Then we had an addUser method which was drilling upwards, which was a prop that we're drilling upwards to actually go ahead and fire this. So in this case, the register user was being called from the app.js, right? So it was being called from the app.js. So when we say addUser, the addUser method is the one that is going to be called. So from the register user, I can actually see that we were calling the addUser method inside the app.js, right? And then we're simply resetting our form, right? So let's simply go ahead and go back to the addUser. So what we want to do is we want to perform a post request, right? Inside this app.js. So remember, for all our API calls, we're going to perform them inside this app.js. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Axios, which is an HTTP promise-based library, which is an HTTP client. So what we're going to do, the first thing that we need to do is we need to bring in Axios. So I'm going to say import Axios from then Axios, right? So once you've brought in Axios, for all our requests, our API requests, we're going to be using Axios. So let me just remove this, right? So what you need to do when we're adding a user, we're simply going to say Axios dot, it's a post request, right? So remember, the endpoint that we had put is going to be user/save. Because if you still remember from our API that created using Spring Boot, right? So if we go back to source, right, then Java under controllers, we had a user controller. So inside this user controller, this is where we had defined all our endpoints, which means all our requests that we want to perform. So in this case, to save a user, we were going to hit the /user/save. So this is the one that we're going to hit. Then for displaying all the users, we're going to hit /user/all, right? So let's simply go ahead and fire this save user, right, to save our user in our Spring Boot API. So remember, for you to actually test this out, you need to make sure that your Spring Boot, your backend is running. So in this case, my backend is running, my Spring Boot. I have my MVN start, MVN Spring Boot run. My backend is running. Then also my front-end application Webpack is running as well. Right, so let's simply go ahead and fire the /user/save. So remember, this Axios, it returns a promise, so which means we need to put the then, right? So we need to say then, right? So inside our then, we need to actually go ahead and catch our response. So in this case, we are going to catch our response, right? Then inside our response, so remember, we are saying we are posting to /user/save, right? So what we need to pass the object really that we want to save. So in this case, we are passing the user. This is the object that we want to save, right? So once we have posted, right, so we need to catch actually the response. So for the response, what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to go ahead and update this user's objects, right? So before I do the update, the first thing that I need to do is we need a way of saving our state of users. Right now, I had that coded this user's object, right? But we need a way to actually go ahead and save the state of our users. So we don't do it this way. So how we are going to save the state of our users is we're going to use our React hooks, just like what we did in the register user form. So the hook that we want to use in this case is called useState, right? So here we're going to say import useState, right? So remember, useState is a hook that we can actually use in our React functional programming. So we're going to say import React. We need a comma, right? Where we need to import useState. So to use useState, in this case, our useState, remember, we had said how you use it is you simply declare your variable, then we simply declare the object that you want to store your users. So in this case, we want an object called users. Then you probably need a setter method that is going to set your users. So in this case, my method, I'm going to call it set users. So just like what you did in the register user when we are handling our on change on key press, right? So then we use the use, right? We use the use state. We use the use state. In this case, our use state is going to contain an array of users, right? So instead of hard coding our users here, we are now saving is state, right? Inside the users object. So which means this, we no longer need this. So let me simply go ahead and remove this users object, right? So which means I now have my users object here. So this is the one that is being used to pass the data, right? So what we are going to do is, right, once we have posted our data, right, to our API, right, what we need to do is we want our API to actually go ahead and save the data, right? Once our API has saved the data, we actually need to go ahead and update our UI. So to update our user interface, what we do is we set we actually go ahead and call this set users, right? So let's simply go ahead and call the set users, right? So once you call the set users, what happens is we simply it will simply go ahead. We need to update the users that are in this users object. So what in this array of users, right? So what I'm simply going to do is I'm simply going to make a copy by using the spread operator, right? So I'm simply going to say spread the users that we already have in our users array here, right? I'm simply going to make a copy of those, right? Then I'll simply go ahead and update the response object that would have received to actually append the data in that array. So I'll simply go ahead and say response.data, right? So what this means is what I'm simply doing here is I'm simply setting or updating the users object by using the hook called set users. So I'm simply saying set users. So remember, our use state is taking an array of objects. So in this case, I'm simply to update my users object, I'm simply spreading the users to make a copy of what I already have. So if I have nothing, in this case, let's say I don't have anything in my users object, it will simply return an empty array. Then we simply go ahead and append the user object that would have received from our response. So from our response, the object will be under the data object. So this is how for the most part you actually do it in terms of adding your user, right? So once I've done that, I can simply go ahead and save this, right? So once I've saved this, let's simply go ahead and test this out, right? So let's go ahead to our Chrome, right? And let's refresh it. So remember, we removed our users object, which means we now have nothing. We no longer have anything here. So let's simply go ahead and save our user, right? So in this case, I'm going to save this user. All right, so let me simply go and save John. Let's say duo, right? Then John at Gmail. Then for the email, for the username, I'll say Johnny. Let's say Johnny1. Then for the password, I'll put the password, right? So once I hit submit, right? Once I hit submit, I should have my users here, right? So if I go ahead and inspect, right, you can actually see that I do not have any issues here. So once I hit submit, you can actually see that I now have my user object. So this user object is now coming from my RESTful API, which means if I refresh this page, right, I'm supposed to have this REST API. So right now, let me refresh, right? Exactly. So right now, as you can see, I've refreshed my page, but I do not have my users, right? But it doesn't mean that I don't have my user have not been persisted, right? My user has been persisted, but I'm not receiving it. So what could be the problem? So here the problem is, remember, when we are working with React, right, we need some we need to do some sort of some React lifecycle methods that we have, right? So if you remember, if we were working with React classes, you'd need to include things like component did mount, component did update, right? Whenever you update, whenever your DOM changes, or whenever your DOM is updated. So you need to put the component did mount or the component did update, and etc. So with React hooks now, since we're using functional programming, we can't use those lifecycle methods, right? So the React comes with another hook that is called useEffect. So the useEffect hook is actually a powerful hook that is almost similar, that is similar to the components, to your components did mount, to almost all your lifecycle methods that you'd have. Component did receive props, component did update props, and etc. All those lifecycle methods, they are all housed in a hook called useEffect. So let's simply go ahead and bring it in and bring in our useEffect hook, right? So once we have brought our useEffect hook, right, to use this hook, right, we simply go ahead and use it here. So this hook is almost similar to our component did mount. So let's simply go ahead and use it. So to use it, you simply go ahead and say useEffect, right? So this useEffect hook, it takes a callable, right? So let's simply go ahead and put our arrow function, right? This is a callable, right? Then it also takes an array, right? So what this array is if you actually have some of the objects or some of the data that you want the component, for example, the component did mount to be called specifically when those changes, those objects, would put them in here. But in this case, I'm going to leave it blank, right? So what we are going to do is we want to run the component did mount so that whenever we start our application, whenever we restart our DOM, we want it to be able to get the data, right? To get the data from our API, right? So remember here we have defined the add user only, right? But we now need to define the get users, right? So let's simply go ahead and do that. So I'm simply going to say const, right? I'm now defining a new a function called get users, right? So what this get users does is it's going to get our users from our API, right? So if you still remember, from our API, we're going to use our Axios again, right? So we're simply going to say Axios like so dot get, right? We're going to fire a get request, right? So if you still remember from our API, if you go to source controller, user controller, right, for our to get all users, we use /user/all, right, like this. So let's simply go ahead and fire that, right? So we're going to fire /users/all. So this is where we are going to fire our get request, right? So remember, this also returns a promise, so we need to put our dot then, right? Then we simply need to get the response that we're getting. So in this case, we are simply going to get the response, whatever the array of users that we're going to get, right? Then once we have get the response, we now want to actually go ahead and update our set users. So to update our users object. So to update our user object, we simply go ahead and call our set users, right, method. Then we simply go ahead and say response dot data, like this, right? So for this so this is pretty much it. For this method to be implemented, we now need to call it in our useEffect hook, right? So to call it in our useEffect hook, we simply go ahead and call the get users the get users method, right? We simply go ahead and call it like so, right? So once you have called it like so, the get users, it's going to get all the users for all the data that we have persisted in our REST API. So let's simply go ahead and navigate to our Google Chrome, right? So the use effect, just take it as a component did mount. So let's simply go ahead and refresh our page again. So we have refreshed it. Let's see. Seems as if we are not getting our data. So it's saying load resource. The server responded with the server with an status of 0, error 404. So it seems as if we are having a server error, right? Which means our API, there's something wrong with our API. So this is actually good news because it means our use effect is working, or our component did mount when we are working with classes. So our use effect is working, but we are having a 404 error from our server. So let's simply go ahead and debug our server, right? So I will go back to my VS Code. So remember, in my user controller, initially I did not have a slash here. So I put a forward slash. So it was like this. Then I later on put a forward slash, right? So once I made this change, the next thing that I need to do is probably to restart my server. So let me close this up, right? And restart my server. Right, so I'm suspecting that this API core is the one that we are actually having issues with. So let me restart the backend REST API, right? So again, I'll say it, guys. So if you haven't checked out the tutorial where we created this REST API for a full stack application, just quickly go ahead and check out the link in the description below, so that you can actually go ahead to the link where we have created the REST API using Spring Boot. So let me close this up. Sorry about this, guys. This has nothing to do with React. I think it's just an error that just came up. All right. So once our server is rebooted, let's just quickly go back to Chrome and refresh our browser. I seem to be having the same issue. So /user/o, the application, let's see what's going on. So /user/o. So let me go back again to my REST API. All right, so it's not /users, it's /user. All right, my bad. So it's /user/o, like this, not /users. So let's simply go ahead and save this. Sorry about that, guys. So let's simply go ahead and navigate. Sorry. So let me show you where I'd made a mistake. So here I'd said /users. It was like so. So it's supposed to be /user/o, right? So my bad, right? So let's go back to the browser, right, and refresh again. So right now I'm now having issues. I suppose I'm now having issues with my webpack. Sorry, no, not really. It's supposed to be /user, not /users, right? So it's supposed to be /user. So right now I'm receiving an empty array. All right, so I'm receiving an empty array because remember, I'm using, for my database, I'm using an H2 database, right? I'm using an H2 database. So remember, we said that the H2 database is volatile. So which means that moment when I restarted my server, it means I've lost the data that I'd persisted. So let me simply go ahead and recapture my user again, right? And for the email, sorry, for the username, I will simply say Johnny, let's say 1. Then for the password, I'll say 123 4 123 4. Then I'll submit. Exactly. So this part was working. So the part that we want to verify and confirm is the one where we have refreshed our page. So let's simply go ahead and refresh. All right. So as you can see, you can actually see that if you go ahead and inspect our elements, you can actually see that the data that has been persisted is working, and there are no more complaints from our use effect. So this is how you probably do it, guys, in terms of updating your users with the use effect hook, right? So right now we have created the get users, the add user, right? So what we are now left with is probably the remove user, right? So for the remove user, we want to say each and every time a user is removed, right? Is removed from our API, right? We want to actually be able to remove it from our API. So let me simply go ahead and remove this, right? Let's simply go ahead and remove this comment. So what you want to do is we simply go ahead and use our Axios. So Axios has a delete method. So simply go ahead and say axios.delete, right? So we want to delete from, if you still remember, we want to delete. So I'm going to put some backticks because we want to delete from user, right? User / then we pass the ID. So to pass the ID, I've put some backticks. So to catch the ID here, I'll simply say ID like this. Then this delete user is a promise again. So I'll simply go ahead and say then, right? So inside my then, I'll simply have my callback, right? So inside this callback, this is where I'm going to set my data. So in this case, once I've done this, right? Once I've done this, it will delete that specific user from our UI, right? So what happens is this won't update. Sorry, it will delete the user from our REST API from our backend, right? But the next thing that after we've deleted from our backend, the next thing that we probably need to do is to update our UI so that the UI would delete that user as well. So to update, so I'll simply put a comment, then I'll say updating UI. So to update our UI, what you need to do is we need to filter, right? So we are simply going to use the set users because we want to set the user object, right? So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to say set users, then I'm simply going to use that users object, right? Then I'm going to filter, right? So what I want to filter is I want to filter all users that does not have this ID, right? That we have deleted, right? So I'm simply going to filter. So this filter, it takes a callable again, so it will retrieve a user. Then for that user, I'm simply going to say, can you display all the user which ID is not equal to the ID that I've passed, right? So what this does is this will update our UI, right? And this Axios.delete will actually delete the user from our server, and this will update our UI. So let's simply go ahead and save this, right? So this is for the most part it, guys, in terms of deleting removing our user or deleting that specific user. So let's simply go ahead and go back to our Chrome, right? So once you've gone to our Chrome, remember the update. I'm refreshing it just to make sure it's working, right? So let me close this up, right? So let me go ahead and add another user, right? So this user, I'm going to call her Mary, right? Mary Jane, right? Then Mary at Gmail. Then username, I'll say Maria, right? Then for the password, I'll say 12345. Right, then I'll post. All right, so this is what we need. So let me simply go ahead and add a final one. So let me say names are hard. I don't know, let me say Dave. It's really hard to come up with these names. Dave, let's say Bravo Dave at gmail.com. Okay, so this is not a valid email. All right, then I'll say Davy, then I'll say the password. I'll confirm the password. So if I put a wrong password like this, it won't submit, right? So remember, I said the way I did it is not actually the best way to actually verify your to handle your verification in terms of the password. So as you can see, it's saying password does not match, right? So you probably need to put let's say an element that that will highlight. For example, if I put an incorrect email like this, for example, if I say submit, what's happening? All right, so let me say like this. So you need something like this in terms of your password, right? You need to run to verify your password in a correct way. So let me do it right. So it's 5, right? Like this. Right. So once I've done that, you can actually say that the user is there. My form has been resetted. My form has been resetted, and now you have my 3 users, right? So let's simply go ahead and test out our. So let me refresh this one again, just to make sure that our users has been persisted to our database, right? If I can refresh, you can see that our users are truly in our database. So let me delete, let's say the first user, John Doe, right? Let me delete this. Boom. So once I delete this, you can actually see that John Doe is gone, right? So let's refresh this just to make sure that the user has been truly deleted from our database, right? Boom, we still have 2 users, right? So let's delete Mary. Boom, again we are left with Dave. Let's refresh. You can actually see that we are left with Dave. So this was it, guys, in terms of persisting your data. So if you have reached this part of this tutorial, congratulations, you have made it. You now know how to create a full stack application using Spring Boot and React. And then for the most part, you now know how to create a front-end application using React hooks. So this was it, guys. So for your assignment, you can actually go ahead and implement this update button so that you can actually go ahead and update this user information. So if you want to create some pull requests, right, you can actually go ahead and create the pull requests on the GitHub repository so that you can actually go ahead and update and have an update functionality for these users. All right, so this was it, guys, in terms of persisting your data and creating your front-end application. So if you guys have reached this far, congratulations, you've made it, and you now know how to create your front-end application with React hooks. So in the next section, which is probably the last one, we're going to look at how you can actually go ahead and test your front-end application with JEST, which is a JavaScript testing library developed by Facebook, which is used to test our UI. So stay tuned and see you in the next one.